Joining us now is Jennifer Cook. She's the director of the Africa program at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. From our newsroom, we're joined by Simon Barber. He's currently a columnist for the online edition of South Africa's leading daily newspaper, Business Day. Also with us in the studio is Dr. Kenneth Mwenda. He's an adjunct professor of law at American University. Thanks to all of you for joining us. Dr. Mwenda, when we look at what happened in South Africa's parliament, it led some opposition leaders to say that South African democracy is now broken. Is it broken?
I don't think so. I mean, South Africa has a unique sort of constitutional arrangement. It's one of the few countries in the world where there's no presidential immunity. So you can actually investigate and prosecute a sitting president. That's very unusual. And so we see that President Zuma is, being questioned. You wouldn't find that in many common law jurisdictions because the president enjoys immunity against criminal prosecution. So I think we should give the South Africans a law in the arm, in the sense that, they're actually demonstrating that, leaders can be made accountable. And that's the way it's supposed to be.
Jennifer, what do you make of what happened when, the parliamentary speaker used security forces to remove members of the opposition who was seen as asking, let's say, awkward questions of the president?
Well, I'd say it's not a great example of democratic discourse all around. First of all, you have a small party, 6%, they won, kind of disrupting the State of the Union address, making it impossible for kind of a civic discourse on the big issues that South Africa is facing. So there's that. Then there's the use of the police to escort these guys out. It's a lot of showmanship. And yeah, I mean, that's controversial. But what it does is kind of eclipse the really fundamental issues that South African Parliament should be talking about. And the scandal is big, but it's not the biggest thing that South Africa is facing right now. So it's democratic, but it's not a very pretty picture in terms of kind of the civility of democratic discourse.
Right. Simon, do you agree that what happened in Parliament actually eclipses what Parliament should be discussing, serious policy matters? I mean, what we have here is a perception that this was a free-for-all in Parliament, that this was just business as it takes place, as many people believe in Africa all the time.
Well, I would agree a lot with what both the speakers have said. I think that the media bubble in South Africa has sort of blown this a bit out of proportion. South Africa isn't unique in having this kind of hubbub and ruckus. I do think that the row goes to a deeper point, and that is that there is deep concern about the levels of corruption in the South African government, and those are what the economic freedom fighters are trying to raise. They're just simply not getting the answers they want out of President Zuma regarding the public expenditure on his private home at Nkandla, and so bringing the system to the debate to a halt over that. That has to be addressed, and I think the Economic Freedom Front are actually performing a useful service in doing that.
Dr. Mwenda, let's take a listen to what some opposition leaders, including Julius Malema, who's the leader of the Economic Freedom Fighters, what he had to say shortly after this incident in Parliament. Let's watch this.
Armed police officers in plain shirts stormed into this sacred chamber and physically attacked members of this House. This was more than an assault on members of Parliament. It was an assault on the very foundations of our democracy, honorable members.
We are not scared, Mr. President. Neither are we scared of you or your factions, including the state institution, because we know that we shall overcome and victory is certain.
So here we had a situation which, as Jennifer pointed out, was a lot of showmanship. It makes for great pictures, it makes for great television. But does it set a bad precedent here? In other words, when the president doesn't want to tolerate any kind of criticism or any kind of speech from the opposition, all he does is he orders the police in and says, remove these people.
I don't think so. I don't think President Zuma doesn't tolerate criticism. I think it's the modus operandi in terms of how you conduct dissent. There has to be some degree of civility, especially in the House of South Africa has a bicameral system of legislation, of the legislature. So as a constitutional democracy, I mean, South Africa is one of the leading nations on the continent. In fact, South Africa is on record as having been elected twice on the permanent, as a member of the UN Security Council. It's a non-permanent member, twice it's been. So in the event that we are looking at a country that might possibly be the first African country to be a permanent member of the UN Security Council. So these are some of the issues, I think, that come to the fore if you look at perception, public perception, going forward. Where are we taking the country forward? I think in terms of discourse, there's a way in which you can articulate dissent, rather than having disruptions of a very important speech, which was a State of the Nation address by the President. So I think that the security forces acted in accordance with the law. I don't think there was anything wrong that was done, unless there was abuse of human rights. But really, to just arrest people who are bringing sort of public disorder is not a violation of human rights.
You say they acted within the law, so can the Speaker do this at any time she feels that there is disruption in the chamber?
Not necessarily. It depends, first of all, it depends on the powers of the Speaker to intervene. Number one. Number two, it depends on the type of action that the police took. If the police simply withdrew these people from Parliament, there's nothing wrong. There are various procedures that you have to follow, that the Speaker has to follow, and the powers of the Speaker.
Because the one other thing that I should point out as well is that this brawl didn't just take place in Parliament.
Right.
Opposition members were also prevented from approaching the parliamentary building outside Parliament before this brawl started. There were Democratic Alliance members who were stopped from coming.
If there are members of Parliament who are supposed and entitled to sit in Parliament, then that's a different question. But for those who are sort of disrupting proceedings, there was absolutely nothing wrong. But, you know, to stop people who are entitled to represent the people to sit in the legislature, that's definitely wrong. I mean, then they can bring an action. Right. And definitely you can have, you know, an action before the courts of law. And South Africa has one of the most powerful constitutional courts in the world after India.
Right. And Jennifer, was that the perception that came out, that this was a government trying to stop people who were in opposition to them from coming to Parliament and making their case now?
Well, I think, you know, for democracy to work, everyone has to play by the rules. So I think opinion is kind of mixed in South Africa on this. I think the picture of police entering Parliament and escorting people out is not something South Africans want to see. But nor, I think, do they want, you know, the Speaker, in some ways, you know, what were her options? And perhaps a better option would have been just to adjourn the session. But I mean, I think it plays to the media, it plays to kind of populist sentiment, but I don't think most South Africans want to see that kind of action from either side, either the shutting down of debate, of real serious debate, or police coming in and hauling members of Parliament out. You know, I think the EFF got what it wanted in a way and kind of set it up for that. And, you know, that's, you know, it plays well. It reminds me a little bit of some of, you know, the fringe party tactics here in this country. Plays well to the media, plays well to kind of a populist base, but I think more people want to see kind of a much more civil discourse. There's ways to express opposition.
I mean,
Go ahead, Simon. You want to say something?
Yes, I'd like to. I mean, I think it goes to what we're seeing in Parliament there and in the crackdown on protesters outside goes to a much larger point. The fact is that we've had this liberation movement now in charge in South Africa since 1994. In my experience, governments generally don't last longer than 10 years before they become heavy-handed. I think there's a great sense in South Africa of this one big party is, in fact, squashing out democracy. And I think that you're seeing in the rise of the EFF and others a kickback against that. That there's a sense that under President Zuma, dissent is being squashed, that President Zuma is putting his own people in key positions, key judicial positions, key policy-making positions to protect himself. I think democracy is actually under threat a bit in South Africa from the sheer size and dominance of the party. Now, that may well change in the upcoming municipal elections 2 years from now, and again at the end of President Zuma's term. There are signs, for example, that the ANC is losing votes very heavily in Gauteng, which is the industrial heartland. Obviously, the opposition Democratic Alliance controls the Cape. So the ANC's dominance is fraying, but as it does fray, the ANC itself is perhaps squashing democracy a bit in order to maintain itself in power.
Dr. Mwenda, is the ANC squashing democracy? Has it become a party that's grown too fat and will not tolerate any opposition?
Not necessarily so. If you look at the lifespan of political parties, this is a party that was sort of the founding party after apartheid. The lifespan of most political parties in much of contemporary Commonwealth Africa is such that after independence you expect 15 to 20 years, and after that the argument changes. It's no longer about the ideology of independence, but more about economic issues. So South Africa, what it's going through is no longer about race relations alone, which was the case when apartheid ended. It's more about economic issues. And that's why now you see that, you know, there are all these other stakeholders who are coming on board, economic freedom fighters under Julius Malema. And so it's expected. It's not unique to South Africa. Zambia went through it, 27 years, President Kaunda, the movement for multi-party democracy came in power. We've seen that in a number of African countries. So this is not unusual for Africa.
Okay, I want to get to some of those issues that you mentioned in just a moment, but we are going to have to take a break right now. In South Africa, historic unemployment, rising corruption and racism. Next, we'll discuss the future of South Africa 20 years after apartheid. Stay with us. You're watching The Heat.